All right, I talk a lot about doing therapy, delivering therapy, or ideas of personal growth, kind of the theory behind it, the psychology of it, the education behind it, because I really feel like, whenever a car breaks down, we pick up the hood and we stare at the parts and we're like, we can't fix anything. Because unless you're a mechanic or engineering, empowered, we don't understand what it is, so we can't really fix it. So I like to give a lot of education. 2 parts: adult self, child self, triggers, emotions. How does it work? The whole thing. Fine. But how did I get here? And what do I bring to bear? Sometimes people ask me, what are your techniques and what are your approach and how are you trained? And so besides being trained as a social worker in New York, I went to school, got my master's in social work. When you're training in a therapy program, you need to do some people call it stage or a placement or field work, whatever. So the first year, it was a 2-year program. The first year I worked in addictions, and I worked in a program. It was a 12-bed facility, and there were, 3 shifts of 7 hours. That's 3 shifts of 8 hours. That gives you 24. So it was my first experience. There were 2 other therapists along with me. It was a program for teen boys, drug addictions. And it was fascinating. It really opened my eyes. But I'm so grateful, not because I have the ability to help people with substances. I mean, that's for sure. But everything is addictions. It's everywhere. And so when someone is struggling in their use, their relationship with a substance, drugs, alcohol, you see it clearly. There's a substance. Okay, I got it. But so many of the other things that we go through, particularly the patterns that we're in, the triggers that go on, the coping mechanisms, we're not really coping. But when emotions come up for us, since we were a kid, we've learned various things about not dealing with emotions, avoiding them, not processing. Some people grew up in homes where not having feelings, needs, wants was like the only way they felt some kind of control, that the house wouldn't fall apart, their world wouldn't crumble. Some people got hit and hurt and screamed at and just torn apart for having feelings, having emotions, expressing themselves. And we basically learned, how to deal with our emotions in unhealthy ways. Because when emotions come up, you can't not deal with them. You have to do something. Any issue that you're going to tell me will bring a person to a typical therapist or counselor. At the core of that issue, if I ask you, when do you typically do it? Tell me about it. And what are you feeling in that moment? Tell me a recent time you did it. What were you thinking, feeling in that moment? Boom. That's the doorway. We walk through. Inner child is right there. There's a whole bunch of emotion that's right there. But so anyway, the idea of what's an addiction is that, how do you see it? It's basically avoidance, and there's so many approaches to avoidance. This is where substances are very similar to these coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, dealing with emotions that we're talking about. You're not dealing with the issue, you're avoiding it. But it's not your fault. Your heart, your mind, your soul, yourself, your body are trying to keep you safe and protected in the only way they know how. And so as a kid growing up in this environment, some emotional needs are met and some of them are not. Both parents bring their own emotional wounds into the home, create a home, and then the kids are growing up in that situation. Some needs are met, a bunch are not. And then how do you deal with those needs that are not being met, or neglect, or I'm getting certain hurtful treatment that I wish I wasn't? How do you deal with it? So through trial and error, we discover different things. It's how people discover, well, if I drink and I drug, I deal with my feelings because they go away. I don't feel them. They're gone for a little while. Like I said, you can't not do something when emotions come up. But any of the issues that would bring a person to a therapist, I'm controlling, I'm an anxious attachment, I'm a people pleaser, I don't have healthy boundaries. Any of them, when you do them, when you implement them, when you find yourself activating one of those, it's always in response to a bunch of emotion that came up and tried desperately to get your attention, felt like anxiety and ignored it and pushed it away. There's a bunch of emotions and the response was like, let me quickly jump in and do this thing. And so what we find is that a person's like, I know I shouldn't be people pleasing. I know I should say no. I know I should leave this guy. I know I should leave this girl, and I just can't. Intellectually, I know it's not good, not healthy, I shouldn't do it. I know I shouldn't drink. I know I shouldn't drug. I know there are consequences. And yet on an emotional, core, deep, dominant level, we have this like out of control inner child dominating our thoughts, dominating our feelings, dominating our decisions, desperate to get our attention, loading us with anxiety in the hopes that we'll tune in. That's going to win out. And so it looks exactly like addiction, just there's no substance. The person's addicted to people pleasing. The person's addicted to being codependent. The person's addicted to being a people pleaser. The person's addicted to finding emotionally unavailable people and just like nervously trying to attach them and just keep recreating that same old feeling that we had as a kid. And so my work in addictions, where there's a clear substance, there's somebody addicted to a substance, there's the ways they use it and when they use it and how they use it and everything that the 12-step programs make clear to us. And then there's the underlying emotional needs that can only be tapped into and touched on and worked with once the substance is out of the way. And then there's the people around the addict trying to connect, trying to talk to them, trying to control them, right? The addict is out of control with their drug of choice. They can't control it. They're powerless. And then the people around them are codependent, trying to control the addict, and they're out of control and unable to do it. But it was so helpful to me to spend a whole year just working in substance abuse and seeing the patterns and the trends and the whole process of it, because then it's like I just saw it again and again when a lot of people don't see it, because if there's no substance, it's like, well, this isn't addictive. But to me, anytime there's this addictive behavior, which is avoidance, anytime I'm avoiding feelings. You're either a facer and you're healing, or you're an avoider. And there are many avoidance methods like drugs and alcohol, all of the addictions, or blaming, manipulating, being defensive, being a people pleaser, all of them. And so I was able to see it really clear. So, my gosh, this system works exactly the same way. I also read a book called When Society is an Addict. And it was like, oh, there's this idea of the addict, but not necessarily just the person doing drugs and doing alcohol. And so these situations repeatedly they were the same. The behavior was the same. The patterns were the same. The system was the same. The reasoning behind the underlying unmet emotional needs were the same idea. But just because I saw the pattern, I knew the pattern from substances, I just took it and applied it then over to emotional areas. And somebody's like, yeah, I know I shouldn't do this, but I keep doing it. Boom, it's the same thing, whether there's a substance there or not. It's just a red flag. It's an indicator. It's a doorway through which to walk through to begin the healing and really connecting with people. So I'm grateful for that year. It was really helpful. Connected with these kids. They were teen kids really trying to put their lives back together again. But just besides treating substance addictions, people's relationships with substances, there's also the idea of process addictions, addicted to behaviors like gambling or sex. And so all of these you realize that there are other things that can act in a very similar addictive way, and that's where they're called addictions. But so many of us have it. We are avoiding, or we know logically what we should do, but on an emotional core level, we can't. How do you heal it? Well, that's the inner child, desperate to be heard, understood. The very things you notice yourself saying, I didn't get as a kid, it's now up to us to do it for ourselves as adults, and that becomes the very work I like to help people work on. Be in touch. Let me know what you think.